Well, we can now talk to Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, Professor and Dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs in New Delhi. Welcome to the programme. It's been recently revealed that French security services were warned about imminent attacks. Why did they fail, therefore, to address the threat properly, do you think?
Well, you can call it complacency or a failure to join the dots, because often the intelligence is not very precise and it's general. But then to be able to piece it together, clearly it seems like it's a major lapse on the part of the French security establishment. Also, it's now coming out that these attackers on the streets of Paris had a Belgium connection, and quite a few of them had been training there, and one possibly had also gone over to Syria and had come back. So clearly there seems to be not just an interagency coordination problem within France, but also between European Union member countries. And even with the Americans, as you know, the intelligence between France and the US has not always been very good. That's because the US has its own sort of chummy group called the Five Eyes, and which is Britain, Australia, Canada, all the English-speaking countries, and they don't do direct sharing with France. And therefore, we are seeing now, after France was attacked, now they have launched airstrikes in Syria, and now the Americans are saying we're going to open up and give them more intelligence, so-called target packages and all that. Earlier, these was not shared. So obviously, all these add up to the grand failure that we saw in Paris.
The French Prime Minister PM Valls said Friday's attacks were planned from Syria. Just how possible is it to determine who masterminded it so quickly, do you think?
Oh, well, I think the telltale signs are there, and it does look like it has been planned by a mixture of transnational terrorists and jihadists, some of whom have trained in Syria, as well as local homebred radicalized Islamists in France itself. So that much we can be sure. But the point is, the bombing that they've now started in Raqqa, in Syria, how effective can it be? Can it again actually exacerbate the problem in the sense that these targets, are they purely symbolic in value? I'm not really sure that they have any great strategic importance, because if the Americans had these coordinates set up earlier, why had they not them bombed by themselves? Why did they wait until a calamity like this happened and then they gave the information to the French for them to bomb these targets? So I think at the end of the day, the so-called large coalition of over 60 countries that the US has been talking about against ISIS, it's a figment of imagination. Hardly anyone is involved. Britain is not involved. Britain has not been very serious either about taking on ISIS in Syria. And now France lately has woken up after the carnage in Paris. And the Americans don't trust very many of their own NATO allies. So it's looking like a pretty poorly coordinated operation altogether.
Another country that has refrained from an all-out air campaign in Syria so far is the UK. Prime Minister David Cameron has been pushing, we believe, for a large-scale operation in Syria, but has found a wall of resistance in Parliament. Why do British MPs have concerns about the US-led coalition campaign?
Well, as you know, in the past, Britain has almost suborned itself to be a pawn of the US, and increasingly the Labour Party, as well as even some Conservatives, have been trying to strike out Britain as an independent player and that it should not be too dependent on the US. So all these tensions have now emerged. In a way, the crisis in Paris that we saw a couple of days ago and the ongoing failure of the Western campaign in Syria are exposing some of these divisions and deep fault lines.
Russia is now pushing for a common international front against terror. Are Western countries likely to be more flexible to the idea of joining forces with Moscow now?
They should be. Unfortunately, just a few days ago in the UN General Assembly, Saudi Arabia moved a resolution in the Third Committee condemning Russian and Iranian intervention in Syria. And all the Western allies of Saudi Arabia backed it, including France. And they condemned Hezbollah, they condemned Iranian Revolutionary Guards, but there was no mention of any of the Sunni jihadist groups that have been propped up by the West and its allies. So unfortunately, that kind of fault line, the politics that they're playing remains. They want to remain in control and they don't want to let any other player come in to the war against ISIS. And unfortunately, that is why ISIS has metastasized. It started as a regional body. Obama thought that he could contain it, and he said we have more or less confined it to Iraq and Syria, and now we are seeing that it is spread much beyond. So at least now, lately, they should learn from the mistakes and try and come together as one, along with Russia, along with Iran, and all other concerned players. Otherwise, there is going to be more attacks and more blood on the streets like this.
Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, Professor and Dean of Jindal School of International Affairs in New Delhi. Thanks for joining us this hour.